It's my absolute privilege and pleasure to see Mark again after all these years, and an opportunity to sort of pick up on sort of where he left off and where we left off as an industry. You know, leaving the industry when you did a couple of years ago, it left a huge hole. And I don't mean that physically, I mean that in terms of personality and also in terms of your contribution. But you've gone on to have a very interesting time of it. And so I wanted to just focus first of all on your role, moving, jumping, throwing yourself into political life as a Minister of State for Trade Policy. And interestingly, Mark, you assumed that role on the 29th of February, 2016, which is a funny date. Why did you decide to enter politics, and what were you tasked with doing?
Good afternoon, everybody. It wasn't ever my plan to go into politics. In fact, my wonderful wife, Judith, said to me, if you ever go into politics, I'll leave you. And so when I got a call to go and see Sir Jeremy Haywood, and he said to me, David Cameron's minded to invite you to become Minister of State for Trade and Investment, I said I'd needed some time to think about it, mainly to phone Judith and to check that she was cool with it. I did that, and she was cool. So I then saw David Cameron as Prime Minister, and he invited me to take on the role, wanted me to start straight away. It was 10 days before he got some concessions from the EU before the referendum vote. Neither of us talked about the referendum when we chatted, and then of course he left 4 months later. So I went in to be Minister of State for Trade and Investment, and then Theresa May appointed me to be Minister of State for Trade Policy with a brief to look after our future trade deals. So I never intended to go in. I never said I wanted to go into politics or do this job. It was a call out of the blue, but I just thought it would be a remarkable thing to do. David Cameron asked me to do it for 2 years. I said to him I didn't think that was a long time, and he said, wait until you do the job. And 2 years is a very, very long time in politics.
Yeah, so the job description with the EU referendum result obviously changed. Did it make the job harder, Brexit? And were you involved in any way, have you been involved in any way in the EU negotiations?
So my job changed totally. The EU negotiated all the trade deals on behalf of the UK. We had a small team of 45 people in trade policy who would input the UK's point of view. But mainly the job was about trade promotion, so helping UK producers sell their goods internationally, including, of course, food and drink. The job post-referendum was to do a number of things. First of all, to make sure that the UK has its own schedules at the World Trade Organization so that we can trade as an independent nation come March 2019. The second thing that we needed to do was to ensure that all the current trade deals, which have been negotiated by the EU, roll over to be UK trade deals. So I visited 35 countries to get that reassurance that those countries wanted to do that with the UK. Then we had to set out new bills and powers so the UK can trade independently with the right oversight from Parliament when we move to an independent trade policy. And then lastly, there's the input into the EU trade deal. And I remained on the EU Trade Committee post-Brexit until I left in September last year.
So, as an industry veteran with all those years of experience, how do you view now the UK's prospects in a post-Brexit environment?
Well, I might surprise you to hear, I feel surprisingly positive. I voted to remain. I campaigned to remain. I felt that that was the best thing to do given the unique position the UK had created for itself over many years in terms of opt-outs, not being in the euro. But I pretty quickly came to the view that that's what the people voted for. And it was then about, well, what deal does the UK need to satisfy a vote to leave and to secure the best economic prosperity for the UK going forward? I think that being in the single market is not leaving the EU, whether you do it the Norway way or any other way. Being in the customs union doesn't help the UK because you have to accept lower tariffs on goods coming in from third-party countries, but you don't get the benefit of lower tariffs reciprocally with that country. So when I went to Turkey last year, the Turkish Minister of Trade was very keen to lobby me to make sure that Turkey benefited from the negotiations that the EU was having with Japan, because the fear in Turkey was that tariffs on Japanese goods coming into Japan would be lowered, coming into Turkey would be lowered to be consistent with the whole EU so they could trade as part of the customs union, but Turkey couldn't get lower tariffs for its goods going into Japan. So as a short-term measure, that would be fine for the UK. But my view is that over a 5 and 10 and 20-year period, it would significantly limit the UK's ability to trade with those other countries and would put us at a disadvantage to the EU. So through a year and a half, I came to the view that where the government has got to now, an independent, comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU is the best economic outcome. It will be really hard work. I think that there will be bumps along the road over the next 2 or 3 years, but I'm actually pretty optimistic that if you were to take a 5 or 10-year view, the UK can have a really strong independent trade policy. For me, the reason I'd vote to remain again if there was a vote today is because I think that Brexit is a distraction from the really big issues facing society, about how people feel about the pressure they're under their daily jobs, concerns about whether our public services are able to cope with an ageing population, etc. And I think those are the pressing issues, and particularly how we respond as a nation to a new digital world. When we moved from the agrarian revolution to the industrial revolution, we needed people. As we move now into the digital revolution, there's a need for fewer people. We're hollowing out workforces. And therefore, we have to think about how we retrain, re-equip people, how we have to change the way that our economy works. And therefore, I think those are the things that, in an ideal world, we'd be focusing on now. But frankly, the government's time for at least the next 2 years, if not longer, will be totally focused on us withdrawing from the EU. So it's not that I don't think the UK can't be successful outside the EU. I think it can. I'd rather, though, that we were putting our time and energy now into much bigger global issues around how people view capitalism, which I think is the best model, but also how people are viewing their lives and the way their lives are being changed by a digital age.
You're, of course, still in the House. Although you've quit the ministerial role, you are still a member of the House of Lords. In fact, you have this wonderful title, which is Baron Price of Sturminster Newton, which is magnificent. I'll just call you Lord Price. It's a lot shorter. Or Mark. But can you still be influential in any way as a member of the House of Lords?
I think that there are topics where you can decide to put your time and energy and you can have an impact. But in one way or another, everybody's influential. You're influential. You can write about plastic or business rates or whatever, and you can create a consensus. So the thing that's most important in terms of changing a government's view is to build a consensus around a point of view that becomes the powerful view of the day. You have a great opportunity to do that. Everybody in business has a great opportunity to do that through one lobbying group or another. I feel extraordinarily privileged that on any topic I can stand up in the Lords and I can address the government and the government ministers in the Lords and give a personal point of view. That's a great privilege and one that I don't want to let go. And it is about finding the right issues. So I've got to go back to vote this afternoon. There's a piece of legislation going through. Tomorrow we're debating some amendments to the EU withdrawal bill, which I think are very important, about whether we should put into that bill the right for people to have a second referendum based on the deal that the Prime Minister had, also about a commitment to stay in the customs union. And I think these are really important issues for the Lords to have a view and to back to the House of Commons.
So you're obviously really quite occupied in terms of the House of Lords. Is that occupying all your time, or you managed to find time to do other things? And if so, what exactly are you up to? I heard something about you have 90 perry trees, for example, in your garden that you tend to. And of course, you've become known for your love of chess, and you've written lots of books. So just talk a bit about what you've been up to besides the sort of the political day job.
So I go to the House of Lords on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the afternoon. If there's votes or debates, I go along. I write every morning. I love to write. I've been writing for 12 years. I've written children's books. There's a number at the moment with my literary agent, and one out that helps children play chess. I've written Fairness for All, about why having an engaged and happy workforce is important and how you achieve it. I've written a book of workplace fables, so true stories, which I've turned into fables. And I write a fable every Tuesday for the Telegraph newspaper, so there's one there today. And then I've built a website digital offer, which is all about helping individuals to measure their workplace happiness. It's free of charge. You can go there, you take the test, it takes 5 minutes, 15 questions, and it compares your happiness against people who look like you, so your age, your gender, your industry, and it compares you to everybody in the world who takes the survey. The survey is available in 79 countries. And so through that, what you get is some indication of how happy you are at work, but also where you might develop your workplace happiness. I think that's important for individuals going forward. I think it's good for businesses, because businesses with happy and engaged workforces do better. All the research shows 20% higher profits, 20% higher productivity, 43% lower wastage, 134% higher earnings per share, lower staff turnover, lower absenteeism. And so I think it's really good for business to have an engaged workforce, but also, given what I've said I think we're going to go through, it's also good for society that people are more engaged, not only in their workforce, but in democracy as well. So I've sort of dedicated myself to building that site, making it free to individuals to go and use. Next week I launch an app, a business communications app to go with it. So it's a business dedicated messenger and also global hub for business people to talk about business in a serious way. And then there's other things I want to do to build that franchise. So I've become a bit of a digital entrepreneur. I'm a writer in the morning. I go to the House of Lords in most afternoons and evenings. And I've just accepted the chairmanship of a charity, which will be announced next week. And I've just accepted a role on the council of my old university. And that pretty well keeps me occupied.
Good. I just want to talk about chess briefly and the relevance of chess to business. To what extent is business like a game of chess? Do you spend, or have you spent, I should say, a lot of time thinking about your opponents?
I think business is exactly like chess. It is thinking about what your competition is going to do. At London Business School, more than 20 years ago, I asked the strategy professor, a great guy called Kostas Markides, was there one strategy that had outperformed all others as implemented by business? And he said, yes, do the opposite of what all your competitors are doing. So when you zig, they zag. When they zag, you zig. And so when I ran Waitrose for nearly a decade, most of my time was looking at where the competition was going and thinking about how we could offer a different point of view on a topic. So when people talked about low prices, we talked about value, quality, and higher prices. When people talked about service, we would talk about service in a different kind of way. And so thinking all the time about the competition is really important. I've just finished a fable, funny enough, today, which will probably go in the Telegraph in a few weeks' time, And the moral of the fable is that more than anything else, you're defined by your competition. I mean, it's another great lesson I learned at business school. And therefore, thinking about what your competition are doing, planning ahead, deliberately trying to be different is, in my view, one of the keys for success.
I've got to ask you then, what was the best move you ever made in business? What one individual play?
Well, the one that was commercially the most successful was giving customers free cups of coffee. The true delivered cost of a cup of coffee was at the time about 14 pence. And yet the customer's perceived value of a cup of coffee was £2 plus. So the customer thought that they were getting an absolute bargain for 14 pence. We didn't have many restaurants or coffee shops, so we weren't cannibalizing an existing trade. I think at the time we had about 40 or 50 coffee shops, restaurants. And when you looked at the comparative cost, a page advert in the Daily Mail was £20,000, £30,000. So you could virtually give most of your customers that wanted it a free cup of coffee for less than the price of an advert in the Daily Mail. So it was just counterintuitive to what people would think, because they saw it as a high perceived cost, not as a real cost. The other thing that I believe, and have always believed quite strongly, and I learned from a really great retailer when I started out, was that the priority is to look after the customers that you've got. Quite often marketing departments just think about the new customers that we're going to go after. How do we change this brand to get a new load of customers? Whereas I was more fixated with how do we give the customers we've got even more value? And therefore giving them a free cup of coffee, giving them a newspaper. And it all came from a conversation that I was having with our ad agency and the brilliant marketing director, Rupert Thomas, at the time, which was, what can we do that's different? And the conversation got on to, what do you do to welcome somebody when they come to your home? And of course it got to, well, you offer them a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And we said, well, why can't we do that? And then it was, well, if you were going to do something, you'd say, read the paper, read the magazine while I go and do whatever. Think, well, why can't we do that? And so it was thinking about how you look after people and turning it into a retail concept. So I think in terms of the one single commercial thing we did that had the greatest impact and drove huge volume increases, it was that. The other thing was probably Essential Waitrose, which drove huge success early on.
But of course, Waitrose has now sort of rode back from the free cup of coffee. You've now got to bring your own cup and so on. And there's been a sense that a lot of freeloaders have come into Waitrose and have only bought the coffee, or not bought, have only come there for the coffee and haven't really sort of engaged with the shop as a whole. Is that not the case, that this is what it's about, is rowing back like that?
Well, I can't speak for Rob and the strategy now, but there's a constant evolution and you have to keep changing the way you do things. I don't think anything should be set in aspect. Green Shield stamps weren't for Tesco. So you have to look at initiatives at their time, see if they work, and see if you can think of something that's going to drive more. In terms of the free coffee, 98% of customers who took a free coffee shopped in the business. So there were a few who shopped and didn't shop on that occasion. But then you didn't know if their partner was shopping or their children were shopping and they just bought a coffee and therefore there was no corresponding transaction. So the number was actually pretty small in the great scheme of things. In terms of the move that they've just made about reusable cups, I think that's really clever marketing. To say to people, we're really concerned about the environment, we're really concerned about throwing away coffee cups. If you bring your own reusable cup, and by the way, we have them in Waitrose, you still get your free coffee, it sounds as though they're both doing a good thing for environment and still providing that benefit.
Okay. You've said that some of the business models of your rivals, your former rivals, are fundamentally flawed. You said that a while in the last sort of year or so. But looking at Waitrose, you'd have to say that the partnership model is also under pressure, isn't it? Do you, and with all this sort of structural change and the Brexit-driven inflation and all the focus on price and so on and so forth, Do you have any thoughts you could share on how you think a Waitrose, but not just the Waitrose, the more upmarket retailers can respond?
Well, I wouldn't particularly have any views on Waitrose, but I do have views on the retail sector. I think that retailing is going to get tougher for traditional players. 75% of the taxes that are raised in the UK come either directly or indirectly through business. Therefore, if you are in government and you need to put more money into the health service, or you need to find ways to invest more in education or the welfare system, you are going to look to raise most of that money from business. So whether that's going to be rates, whether that's going to be sugar tax, that's where you're going to see pressure. And I don't think that's going to go away. So whether it be the living wage and taking people out of welfare benefits, or whether it be, as I say, the sugar tax, retailers and businesses should expect to see a continuing push, I think, in terms of taxation. On top of that, rents are going up and the wrong way and made all the more difficult by digital. Digital players have no problem whatsoever getting funding at levels that most of us that have grown up in a traditional model would just say are completely unrealistic, but they take a different view. So there's a different lens that's put over the new retailers. And so for all of those reasons, traditional retail is under real pressure. But you can still be a great retailer if you get the customer offer right. Fundamentally, it is about making sure that those people want to come to you rather than somebody else. And the core parts of that haven't changed. You need to get your pricing right, you need to get your product offer right for those customers, and you need to get the service delivery right. And the people that do that best will win. It is that straightforward. One of the things that I became obsessed about before I left Waitrose, so 3 years ago, was looking at food for age and for condition. And we've seen some of that. But if you go down a pet aisle in any supermarket in the UK, you'll see pet food for small dogs, big dogs, young dogs, old dogs, dry, dogs that have got brittle bones, dogs that have got bad teeth. You look at the assortments for humans, we have baby food and we have the rest. And I think there's a huge opportunity, which I see Holland and Barrett starting to take, to say, you know what, wouldn't it be good if you were to say to older people, eating eggs is fantastic. It's great protein, it's easy to consume. And therefore, I think there's a big market in terms of identifying food for life stage, food for conditions, which hasn't as yet been embraced in the UK as much as it might. Interestingly, I was listening to the CEO of Family Mart from Japan this morning, talking about how they're doing that in Japan. It was really interesting how they've got now an aging population, average age 83, and how they're making sure that they're providing meals that are right for that audience. So I think there are still lots of innovative things that can be done. If you look at what's happening with Just Eat or Deliveroo, that opportunity to deliver meals prepared to people's homes, how does the food retail sector respond to that? What about the eating out opportunities? How does the retail sector respond to that? So there's lots and lots of things that need to be done. I think that in a digital age, you should look very hard at owning your own product, owning your own platform, investing in customer service. So all of those things I think are really important. So it is a tough time for retailing, there's no doubt. But I think that, you know, focusing on the fundamentals of trading, you will still see businesses that succeed.
Two more questions we've got time for, and the first one is about suppliers. What do you feel are the prospects for suppliers in this post-Brexit world? Which suppliers have the best chances, and are there any up-and-coming suppliers here today, for example, that you're excited about?
So there's both a huge opportunity and a huge challenge for UK suppliers with Brexit. The reality is that I think a number of people voted for Brexit because they believed it was going to provide a kind of protectionism. And on my foreign travels to Germany and Austria and Holland and France, I saw people protesting on the streets about a free trade deal with Canada, because they were afraid that their jobs were going to be taken by cheaper products coming in or by their public services being taken over. And therefore, as we go into a post-Brexit, more global and open world in the UK, we will accept in more competitively priced products because there will be lower tariffs, and we will encourage that. That is going to be great for the consumer. There will be more choice, there will be lower prices, particularly in the food and drink arena. However, that will put pressure on UK producers to be even more effective, even more efficient. But the great opportunity for the UK producers is to be able to take advantage of those trade deals to export and the lower tariffs elsewhere. One of the things that I spent a lot of my time doing as trade minister and travelling the world was lobbying to get protective practices changed in countries to allow British products to go in with either lower tariffs or with a complementary regulation or labelling. I think that that opportunity opens up. In the UK, the reality is our big companies are very good at exporting. We outperform the German and the French. Our very small companies are very good at exporting. We outperform the French and the Germans. Our medium-sized companies are not as efficient. And therefore, where I would be focusing is on making sure that my business was efficient, my product was differentiated, and I looked to overseas market. And I can't think of a better example than that than Charles Reed standing on the back, who has moved the Grocer from being predominantly a magazine into a business services organisation with operations all over the world, and has done that within 5 or 10 years. And therefore, I think the UK is going to have to take a more internationalist mindset in terms of taking those opportunities abroad. Just looking internally, I think is going to be incredibly tough.
Final question is, what is the chance that you will return to an executive role in the food and drink industry? Because we all miss you.
Well, that's very kind. I think it's very, very unlikely. I'm keen to do a chairmanship in a charity, and I hope that that will have some kind of food relation. I'm still patron of the industry charity, which I'm very, very pleased to do. But I'm committed to my writing, and I'm committed to try and help people be happy at work, whether they be in the food industry or the airline industry or the automotive industry, because I feel strongly now that helping people understand what makes them happy at work and helping them evolve in this new area is going to be critical for individuals and for society and business. So my energy is focused on doing that.
Mark Price, Lord Price, Baron Price, thank you very much indeed.